A racist teenager approaches an old black man in the park and starts harassing him. He starts to get physical with the black man until he hears a loud shout and turns around to see a police officer running towards him. Earl Johnson sat on the worn park bench, his old cane resting beside him, the cool wood pressed against his palms. The sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow on the park's paths. People jogged by, children's laughter echoed in the distance, but Earl was at peace in his small corner of the world. The park had become his refuge since retirement, a place where he could sit and think without much disturbance. He heard footsteps approaching, lighter, quicker than the usual pace of passers-by. Earl didn't look up at first, keeping his focus on the quiet rhythm of the park. But then, a shadow loomed over him. "Hey, old man," came a voice, young, sharp, and carrying a note of mockery. Earl looked up, meeting the smirking face of a teenager, white, with scruffy blonde hair and a self-satisfied tilt to his chin. Earl sighed inwardly, but kept his expression calm. "Afternoon," he replied. The boy lingered, shifting from foot to foot, as if he were looking for something to entertain him. His grin widened. "You must have a lot of free time, huh? Guess it's easy to sit around all day when you've got nothing better to do." Earl remained composed, letting the comment roll off his shoulders. "Earned my rest after all these years. Hard work'll do that," the boy snorted, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, bet you worked real hard. What did you do, clean up after folks?" Earl's grip tightened on the handle of his cane, but he kept his voice steady. "I was a teacher. Helped a lot of kids grow up with the right lessons." The boy chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "That right? Seems like folks like you ought to be used to taking orders, not giving them." Earl stared at him for a moment, weighing his words. It wasn't the first time he'd heard comments like that, subtle digs wrapped in casual disrespect. He knew better than to let it get under his skin, but the sharpness in the boy's tone was unmistakable. "Every man's got something to teach, if folks are willing to learn," Earl said softly, leaning back on the bench. The teenager leaned forward slightly, clearly not satisfied with Earl's lack of a reaction. Sure. Must have been tough, though, you know. Standing in front of a bunch of kids that didn't look like you, not really fitting in." Earl's eyes locked onto the boy's, but he didn't respond. The silence hung heavy between them for a moment. The boy's smirk faltered slightly, as if he was confused by Earl's calm. "Well," the boy continued, "don't let me stop you from doing whatever it is old folks do when they're, well, not working." Earl gave a slow nod. "Enjoying the quiet," he said simply. His tone was low but firm. The boy lingered a moment longer, searching Earl's face for something. Anger, frustration, anything. When he found nothing, he scoffed softly and turned away, shuffling down the path with a quick glance over his shoulder. Earl watched him go, the tension in his chest settling back into the usual calm. He'd been through worse. Much worse. And this was just the beginning. Earl sat still, his gaze fixed on the trees ahead. He hoped the boy would lose interest and move on, but he could feel that sharp, youthful energy lingering in the air. It didn't take long before the sound of those quick footsteps returned. The teenager circled back, his smirk broader, as though he had found a new game to play. "Still here, old man?" the boy taunted, picking up a small pebble from the ground. "Guess you don't move too fast these days." Earl didn't respond, his fingers wrapped tightly around his cane. The boy flicked the pebble toward his shoes, the small rock bouncing off the worn leather. Earl's lips tightened, but he didn't give the boy the satisfaction of looking up. "You know," the boy said, bending down to grab another pebble, "my dad always says, some folks just don't know their place. Maybe he's right." Earl closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply through his nose. The boy's words carried the same casual malice he'd heard 1,000 times over, words dipped in contempt, passed down like family heirlooms. Still, Earl remained silent. The pebble clicked against the bench this time, just inches from Earl's hand. "What, you got nothing to say?" the boy pressed, leaning closer. "Figures. You're all tough until someone pushes back, huh?" Earl finally lifted his gaze, his eyes locking on the boy's. His voice came out steady, calm, but with a firm edge. "You got a lot of words for someone who ain't lived long enough to know what they mean." The boy blinked, clearly surprised that Earl had spoken. But instead of backing off, he grinned, clearly thinking he'd struck a nerve. He tossed another pebble, this time hitting Earl's foot. "Maybe you should have worked harder then, huh? Maybe you wouldn't be sitting here all by yourself doing nothing." Earl clenched the cane tighter, feeling the wood creak under his grip. "Son, you ought to be careful what you say. You don't know what you're messing with." The boy took a step closer, ignoring the warning. "I know exactly what I'm messing with. You're just another guy who thinks he's owed something. My dad says it all the time." Earl straightened in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he watched the boy's posture shift, his confidence growing with each insult. The boy flicked another pebble, this one hitting Earl's shin with a soft thud. It didn't hurt, but the meaning was clear. Earl sighed, the weight of the years and the struggles pressing down on him. But still, he held his ground. You think throwing pebbles makes you a man? The boy chuckled, kicking at the dirt. No, but it sure is fun watching you sit there and take it. Guess you're used to that, huh? The calm that had anchored Earl began to shift. A slow but certain frustration building inside him. He had been through this kind of thing too many times before. Always the same arrogance, the same ignorance passed down, generation after generation. But Earl knew better than to react on impulse. He had survived by keeping his composure. Boy, Earl said, his voice firm now, you're playing a dangerous game. One day, someone's going to teach you that words ain't enough to protect you from the consequences. The boy shrugged, unfazed, and with a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed another pebble, harder this time. It bounced off Earl's leg, the sound sharper, more deliberate. And still, Earl didn't move. But in his silence, there was a storm brewing, one the boy couldn't see yet. The teenager looked down at Earl with a sneer. Guess that someone ain't you, huh? For the first time, Earl's eyes burned with something other than calm. But he stayed seated, letting the boy walk away with his false sense of victory. There was still time, Earl thought. Still time for this to end, before things got worse. The park seemed quieter now, though Earl knew it wasn't because the world around him had suddenly gone still. It was the silence between him and the boy, Jason, that felt thick, like a storm building in the distance. Earl kept his eyes on the trees, willing his pulse to slow down, but his grip on the cane tightened again as the boy lingered nearby. Jason hadn't left. His steps shuffled back and forth on the gravel path, aimless but deliberate. The boy was looking for more tension, more conflict, more control. You know, Jason said after a long pause, his voice laced with smugness, my dad always says you people can't take a joke. Earl's chest tightened, but he kept his gaze forward, saying nothing. The boy stood a little closer now, tossing a pebble in the air and catching it repeatedly. The small sound of it landing in his palm irritating, like a mosquito buzzing in his ear. Yeah, he says you all act real tough, but deep down, you're scared. That's why you don't talk back. Jason's words were sharper now, pointed, meant to stab. He glanced at Earl's face, searching for a reaction. Earl remained still, but the boy pressed on. Guess it's easy when people just give you everything for free, huh? Earl's jaw tightened. He kept his breathing steady, but the boy's words dug deeper, striking a nerve. Jason's voice took on a mocking tone as he circled slowly around the bench, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Bet you didn't even have to work for what you got, Jason continued, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. Bet you just sat back and let people hand things to you. That's how it is, right? Get everyone to feel sorry for you? Earl's grip on the cane tightened further. He wasn't going to give the boy the reaction he wanted. He'd spent a lifetime learning how to keep calm under pressure, how to rise above people like Jason, but it was getting harder with each word the boy spat. Jason leaned in closer, his voice a whisper now, but the venom in his tone was unmistakable. You know, my dad says there's a reason people like you live in certain parts of town. Says it's because you don't know how to make anything of yourselves. Earl clenched his teeth, his gaze still locked on the horizon. He'd heard this kind of talk before, too many times, from too many people who thought they were better, but he wasn't going to let this boy, this child, rattle him. Jason, seeing no immediate response, grew bolder. What, you got nothing to say? Thought you'd be tougher than this. Guess my dad's right. Just a bunch of lazy people blaming everyone else for your problems. The last word hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Earl could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, the weight of a lifetime of insults and slights pressing against his chest. He knew if he opened his mouth, it would be hard to keep calm, so he stayed silent, gripping the cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. Jason, frustrated that his words still weren't getting the reaction he wanted, let out a sharp laugh. You just gonna sit there like a good boy, huh? The insult landed hard, sharper than any of the others. Earl's eyes snapped to Jason's, his calm facade cracking for the first time. The boy saw it, the flicker of something in Earl's gaze, and he grinned, leaning in even closer. Yeah, that's what I thought, Jason sneered, his voice low. You don't really got it in you, do you? You're just like the rest of them, waiting for a handout, waiting for someone to feel bad for you. Earl stared at him, the boy's words ringing in his ears. He wanted to say something that would knock Jason down, make him understand just how wrong he was. But he knew that's exactly what Jason wanted. A reaction, something to prove his own twisted point. Instead, Earl spoke slowly, his voice low and controlled. You're digging yourself a deep hole, son. One day, you're going to look back on this and realize how wrong you are. Jason scoffed, rolling his eyes. Yeah, right. Maybe you should have thought about that before you let people like me run circles around you. The boy picked up another pebble and flicked it hard, hitting Earl's leg. This time, Earl flinched slightly, the sharp impact breaking through his restraint. Jason saw it, his eyes lighting up like he'd finally won some invisible battle. See? You can't even stand up for yourself, Jason jeered, stepping closer, his chest puffed out with newfound confidence. No wonder people like you are always at the bottom. Earl's muscles tensed. He had taken enough. He knew he had to stay calm, had to stay in control. But the weight of Jason's words, the casual cruelty behind them, was pushing him to the edge. Walk away, boy, Earl said quietly, his voice laced with warning. Before you do something you'll regret. But Jason, emboldened by Earl's flinch, shook his head grinning. I ain't going nowhere. Not until you stand up and show me what you're really made of. The challenge hung in the air between them. And Earl knew then that this was far from over. Earl sat there for a moment longer, his gaze hardening as the boy's smug grin widened. The park was still around them, the peaceful atmosphere feeling miles away now, distant from the tension boiling between them. Earl knew he couldn't just sit there anymore. The boy wasn't going to stop. His taunts, his arrogance, the poison he was spitting. It wasn't going to end unless Earl made it clear he wasn't someone to be messed with. With a slow, deliberate movement, Earl placed both hands on his cane and pushed himself up from the bench. His legs felt heavy, weighed down by the years of quiet endurance, but they were steady. As he stood, his full height facing Jason, the boy took a step back, startled for a second by the old man's presence. Earl looked down at the boy, his eyes cold but controlled. I've been through more than you could ever know, he said, his voice firm, each word weighed and measured. And I'm telling you, for your own good, you need to walk away. Right now. Jason's bravado flickered, but he quickly masked it with a scoff, stepping closer again, refusing to back down. What, you think standing up is going to scare me? His voice was sharp, but there was a hint of uncertainty underneath it. You think you're tough now? Earl stood his ground, his eyes never leaving Jason's. Tougher than you'll ever know, the boy snorted, tossing another pebble at Earl's feet, clearly not satisfied. You're just an old man. You don't scare me. He paused, then added with a sneer, what are you going to do, huh? Hit me with your cane? Earl's fingers tightened around the cane, but he didn't raise it. His jaw was clenched, his pulse pounding in his ears. I don't need to hit you, boy. You're doing a fine job of tearing yourself down. Jason's face twisted with anger, and without warning he shoved Earl hard in the chest. Earl stumbled back, his cane clattering to the ground as he caught himself on the edge of the bench. His heart pounded as he steadied himself, but he didn't fall. He straightened up again, eyes locked on Jason. But now there was something different in his gaze, something sharp, something unyielding. That all you got? Earl said, his voice low, dangerous. You think pushing me makes you a man? Jason's hands balled into fists, his eyes narrowing. I ain't scared of you, he shouted, stepping forward again. This time, he shoved Earl even harder, sending him stumbling backward, almost losing his balance. You're just a nobody. You don't matter. Earl caught himself, breathing hard, his heart thudding in his chest. But this time he didn't stay quiet. He squared his shoulders, towering over the boy. You've got a lot of hate in you, son. But hate doesn't make you strong. It makes you weak. Jason's face flushed red, his fists trembling as he stepped closer, his voice a growl now. Shut up. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Earl shot back, his voice calm but firm. I know that all that hate you've been taught is going to ruin you. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, it'll break you down. Just like it's breaking you right now. Jason's eyes flashed with rage, and in that moment, Earl saw the boy's real fear, the fear of being seen for what he truly was. A scared kid trying to act tough. Jason lashed out, swinging a fist toward Earl, aiming for his chest. But this time, Earl was ready. He stepped back just enough to dodge the hit, his cane still on the ground, his fists at his sides. He didn't strike back, didn't move to defend himself. Instead, he stood tall, staring Jason down with a kind of strength the boy couldn't match. You're done, Earl said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that made Jason hesitate, his fist still clenched in midair. Walk away before you do something that'll haunt you. But Jason, too deep into his own anger now, wasn't thinking clearly. He shoved Earl again, this time with both hands harder than before, sending Earl crashing back onto the bench. For a brief second, Earl stayed there, breathing heavily, his body aching from the force of the boy's push. His hands tightened into fists, and he could feel the sharp sting of his pride urging him to retaliate. But something stronger held him back, the knowledge that if he reacted, if he struck back, he would be giving the boy exactly what he wanted. He sat up slowly, eyes burning into Jason's. You think you've won something here, boy? Earl's voice was low, but it carried all the weight of his years, his experiences, his wisdom. You haven't won anything. Jason stood there, fists still clenched, breathing hard, staring at Earl like he didn't know what to do next. He had expected Earl to fight back, to give him an excuse to escalate things further. But Earl's refusal to engage had thrown him off balance. The silence between them stretched, heavy and charged. Just as Jason took another breath, preparing to hurl more insults or maybe even throw another punch, a sharp voice rang out from behind them. "Hey, step away from him!" Both Earl and Jason turned, startled by the sudden authority in the air. A tall, uniformed police officer was striding toward them, his expression serious and his hand resting firmly on the radio clipped to his vest. Officer Collins moved with purpose, his eyes locked onto Jason, clearly having witnessed the shove. Jason's face immediately paled. His fists loosened, dropping to his sides as he took a step back from Earl. The confidence he had shown moments before drained from him, replaced by a flicker of fear. Earl, still seated on the bench, breathed deeply, grateful for the sudden intervention, but his body remained tense. He knew things could easily take another turn, depending on how this played out. The officer stopped in front of them, standing between Earl and Jason, his focus entirely on the boy. "What do you think you're doing?" Officer Collins demanded, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Jason stammered, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to come up with an excuse, but no words came out. His bravado had vanished the moment the officer appeared, and he seemed to shrink under the weight of the authority standing before him. "I asked you a question," Officer Collins repeated, his eyes narrowing. "What were you doing shoving this man?" Jason finally found his voice, though it was shaky and defensive. I didn't mean anything by it. We were just talking. He was trying to act all tough, so You just what?" Officer Collins cut him off sharply, crossing his arms. "You think it's okay to put your hands on someone? Harassing an older man in the park? Pushing him around? That's what you call talking?" Jason looked down at his shoes, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I wasn't trying to hurt him," he mumbled. "It was just a stupid thing. I wasn't thinking." Earl, still seated, observed quietly, his eyes on Jason, but his breathing had steadied now. He wasn't sure how this would go, whether the officer would just give the boy a slap on the wrist or whether real consequences were coming. But he felt a quiet satisfaction watching Jason struggle to explain himself. Officer Collins looked at Earl, his tone softening slightly. "Are you all right, sir? Do you need medical attention?" Earl shook his head. "No, I'm all right. Been through worse." He glanced at Jason, then back at the officer. "But this boy here, he needs to learn that actions have consequences." Officer Collins nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's exactly what I intend to make sure happens." Jason's eyes widened as Officer Collins turned back to him, his posture rigid with authority. "You're coming with me," he said firmly, taking a step closer to Jason. "We'll sort this out down at the station." Jason's panic was immediate, his hands shooting up in protest. "Wait, no! I didn't mean... My mom, she'll freak out. You can't take me in for something like this. I didn't even hurt him." "That's not how this works," Officer Collins said, his tone unyielding. "You don't get to decide what's serious and what isn't. You put your hands on someone, you harassed him, and now you're going to face the consequences." Jason's breathing quickened, and he took a step back, shaking his head. No, you don't understand. He didn't care. He didn't fight back or anything." Earl watched, his face unreadable, but inside he felt a strange sense of justice being served. The boy was now realizing what he had done wasn't just nothing. It was wrong, and he was being called out on it. Officer Collins stepped forward, grabbing Jason by the arm with a firm but controlled grip. "I saw enough to know you crossed a line, kid. Now let's go." Jason's eyes flickered with desperation, but before he could protest again, a voice, high-pitched and filled with panic, sliced through the air. "What's going on here? What are you doing with my son?" Earl turned his head, and there she was, a woman charging toward them, her face flushed with anger. Jason's mother. The sound of hurried footsteps and a voice full of outrage echoed across the park. Jason's mother, Karen Miller, stormed toward the scene, her eyes blazing with fury. She was a woman in her mid-40s, dressed in a crisp blouse with expensive sunglasses perched on her head, looking every bit the picture of suburban entitlement. The way she marched toward Officer Collins, you'd think she was about to put him in his place. "What are you doing with my son?" Karen shrieked, her voice sharp and piercing. "Let go of him right now." Officer Collins remained calm, but his grip on Jason didn't loosen. "Ma'am, your son was just caught harassing and assaulting this man," he said, nodding toward Earl, who stood quietly nearby. He's being detained and taken to the station. Karen's eyes flickered briefly toward Earl, but the recognition was fleeting. Her focus was entirely on Jason, and her face contorted with disbelief. Assault? Are you serious? Jason would never hurt anyone. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger toward Officer Collins. You must have this all wrong. My son's a good kid. You can't just arrest him like some criminal. Officer Collins didn't flinch. Ma'am, I saw your son push this man multiple times. He's facing charges for harassment and assault. Karen's face turned redder, her voice rising in pitch as she turned her attention to Earl, who had been watching silently, his face unreadable. Is this because of you? She spat. What did you say to him? What lies did you tell this officer? I know Jason. He would never do something like this unless he was provoked. Earl held her gaze, his expression calm but firm. Your boy wasn't provoked, ma'am. He chose to act the way he did, and now he's got to face the consequences. Karen's eyes flared with anger. Consequences? Oh, I know what this is, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You're playing the victim, aren't you? Trying to make it look like my son is some kind of monster because of people like you. Earl's lips tightened, but he didn't take the bait. He had heard it all before, the casual racism hidden behind faux concern, the denial of responsibility, the blame shifting. He wasn't going to let her turn this into something it wasn't. Ma'am? Officer Collins interrupted, his tone growing more assertive. This is not about anyone playing the victim. Your son made the choice to harass and physically assault this man, and now he's being taken in for that. I suggest you calm down before you make things worse. Karen's mouth opened in outrage and she threw her hands up in disbelief. Worse? Worse? I can't believe this. My son's life is going to be ruined because some old man couldn't take a joke? She turned back to Earl, her eyes narrowing. This is ridiculous. You know what's happening here, don't you? You're trying to ruin my son's future over some petty argument. Earl felt his chest tighten, but he remained as calm as he could. Your son made his own choices today, ma'am, and now he's got to live with them. Karen's voice grew louder, angrier. No, this isn't right. My Jason would never do something like this unless he was provoked. She turned to Jason, her eyes filled with desperation. Jason, tell them you didn't do this. Jason shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his mother and the officer. Mom, I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was just messing around, okay? It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Karen's face hardened, her voice rising even higher. Messing around? Jason, no. You didn't do anything wrong. They're blowing this out of proportion, sweetie. She reached out to touch his arm, her voice trembling with frustration. Tell them that man provoked you. You know that's what happened. Jason looked down at the ground, his confidence crumbling. I don't know, Mom. He didn't really do anything. I just got mad, and Karen's eyes widened with disbelief. No, you're just confused. They're trying to make you the bad guy here. You were provoked, Jason. You wouldn't just attack someone for no reason. Jason shook his head, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. Mom, stop, please. You're not helping. Karen ignored him, turning back to Officer Collins. You see what they're doing to him? She said, her voice frantic. He's just a kid. He didn't hurt anyone. This is ridiculous. Officer Collins's patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, I saw what your son did with my own eyes. He was the aggressor, and now he's being taken in for questioning. You can come to the station if you want. But this discussion is over. Karen's voice cracked, her tone shifting from anger to panic. Please, just let him go. He didn't mean any harm. You can't arrest him. He's just a boy. Jason, sensing his mother's panic, turned to her, his voice trembling. Mom, it's fine. It's not like I'm going to jail, right? They'll just, I don't know, ask me some questions, and then I'll be home. You don't have to freak out. Karen turned to Jason, her eyes filled with desperation. Jason, no. This could follow you. Don't you understand? You could get a record. This could ruin everything. Your future, Officer Collins sighed, shaking his head. He's being taken in, ma'am. Step back. Defeated. Karen took a step back, her eyes still blazing with resentment, but her voice silenced. Earl watched her carefully, seeing in her the same denial and privilege that had poisoned her son. Jason was led away in handcuffs, his head hung low, his confidence completely shattered. And Karen, for all her screaming and protesting, could only stand there, watching her son face the consequences of actions she had spent years ignoring or excusing. Earl remained standing by the bench, his eyes following Jason and the officer as they moved toward the police car. He knew this wasn't the end. There would be more to come at the station. But for now, justice, however small, had been served. The soft rumble of the car engine filled the silence as Earl gripped the steering wheel, his hands steady, His mind anything but. The streets outside seemed almost too peaceful. Children playing in their front yards. People walking dogs, going about their days like nothing had changed. But everything felt different to him. The weight of what had happened in the park lingered, pressing down on his chest. The scene played over and over in his mind. The boy's sneering face, the venom in his words. And then, the mother, Karen, her fury spiraling into something uglier than just denial. She had screamed and flailed, turning the station into a spectacle, and now she sat in a holding cell alongside her son, Jason. Earl hadn't expected her to take things that far. He hadn't expected the boy to escalate like he did either. But as he turned down a quiet street on the way to the police station, he knew none of it really surprised him. Not anymore. The years had shown him too much to be surprised by a woman like Karen or a boy like Jason. As the road stretched out ahead of him, Earl thought back to the moment Karen had exploded, her words sharp and reckless, as if she could shout down the truth. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. It wouldn't be the last either. Her privilege had blinded her, made her believe she could fight the charges with loud indignation instead of facing reality. But reality doesn't bend, Earl thought, his hands tightening slightly on the wheel. It stands firm. The boy, though. Earl's mind wandered to Jason. He'd seen boys like that before, too young to understand the full weight of their actions, too influenced by the people around them. Jason hadn't started out full of hatred. No, that was something learned, something passed down. Earl could see it clearly now, in the way the boy looked to his mother for validation, the way he let her feed his anger. The boy wasn't lost yet, though, not like his mother. Earl knew that much. But as he approached the station, he wondered if Jason would ever have a real chance to unlearn what had been drilled into him for so long. A mother like Karen wouldn't make it easy. The car rolled to a stop at a red light, and Earl stared at the cars passing by. His mind drifted back to his younger days, when he had faced the same kind of venomous words, the same cold stares. Back then, the world had been different, but in some ways, it hadn't changed at all. He thought of the fights he'd walked away from, the insults he'd swallowed, the quiet resilience he had built inside himself. It wasn't easy, it never had been, but he had survived it. And now, here he was, again, another day, another fight. But this time, he wasn't the one who needed to learn. It was the boy, and maybe even more than that, it was Karen. The light turned green, and Earl eased his foot onto the gas, the car moving steadily forward. The police station was just a few blocks ahead now, the familiar building coming into view. He wasn't sure what to expect when he got there. The charges would stand, of course, but the fallout, what would come next, was still unclear. Would Jason understand? Would he listen? Or would his mother's voice drown out everything, pulling him deeper into her world of excuses and anger? Earl sighed heavily, his mind racing. He wanted to believe the boy could change, but he had learned long ago that not everyone was willing to let go of their anger, to open their eyes to the truth of the world around them. He had seen people hold on to hate with both hands, even when it dragged them down. The car turned into the parking lot of the station, and Earl pulled into a space near the entrance. He sat there for a moment, the engine idling as his thoughts continued to churn. There was no clear answer, no simple resolution. There never was. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Jason needed to face the consequences. Not to ruin him, but to give him a chance to grow, to learn. And Karen, for all her shouting and protests, needed to face them too. Earl had made his decision, and there was no turning back now. He shut off the engine and sat for a few more seconds, letting the stillness wash over him. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the car door and stepped out. He had done what was right. Now, it was up to the rest of the world to catch up. As he walked toward the station, Earl felt a strange mix of hope and resignation swirling in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, today would be the start of something different for Jason. Or maybe, it would just be another day in a long line of battles that never seemed to end. Time would tell. But for now, Earl would stand firm, just as he always had. The police station was a stark, sterile place. Too bright, too cold. Earl stepped inside, his cane tapping lightly on the tile floor as the door swung shut behind him. The hum of quiet conversations and the occasional rustle of papers filled the air, but the moment he crossed the threshold, it all seemed to fade into the background. His mind was still turning over everything that had happened, and the weight of what was about to unfold pressed down on him. At the front desk, Officer Collins noticed Earl's arrival and gave a nod. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming back," he said, his voice neutral but respectful. "We've got everything moving forward, but there's been a complication." Earl frowned, leaning slightly on his cane as he approached the officer. What kind of complication? Collins sighed, casting a glance toward the far end of the station where several officers were gathered near a holding room. Jason's mother, Karen, she's not taking this well. She's been, well, uncooperative, to say the least. Earl's gaze followed Collins's eyes to the holding room. Even from here, he could hear Karen's voice echoing in the station, high-pitched and angry, laced with frustration and disbelief. He sighed deeply, his chest heavy. This wasn't going to be easy. I figured she wouldn't, Earl said quietly. She didn't look like the type to let things go. Collins nodded grimly. We tried reasoning with her, told her what the situation was, explained that Jason would likely get community service and counseling if you pressed charges. But she didn't like hearing that. Earl looked over toward the holding room again. I suppose I better deal with it then. As they made their way down the hall, Karen's voice grew louder, and by the time they reached the holding room, it was clear she was losing control. This is insane, Karen was shouting, her face flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists. You can't arrest my son for something so minor. He didn't hurt anyone. This is all a misunderstanding, and you know it. Jason sat slumped in the corner of the room, his hands still cuffed in front of him, his eyes wide and scared. The bravado he'd shown in the park was completely gone now, replaced with a quiet fear as he watched his mother unravel before him. Two officers stood nearby, trying to calm Karen down, but she was having none of it. Do you know who I am? You can't treat me like this. My son isn't some criminal. This man, she pointed wildly toward Earl as he entered the room, he's making this into something it's not. He's trying to ruin us, and you're all going along with it. Earl stepped forward, his expression steady but tired. Ma'am, I'm not trying to ruin anyone. Your son made his own choices. Karen's eyes blazed with fury. Choices? He's just a boy. He didn't know what he was doing. You're the one who's trying to act like he's some kind of thug. All he did was push you, and now you're blowing it up like he committed a crime. Earl met her gaze calmly, the weight of years of experience keeping his voice level. Pushing someone is a crime, ma'am. He didn't just say words. He laid hands on me. You know that. Karen's face turned redder, her fists clenching tighter. You people are all the same. You think you can just destroy someone's life because you don't like the way they act. Jason doesn't deserve this, and I won't stand here and let you do this to him. Officer Collins, standing nearby, took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice firm. Ma'am, you need to calm down. This isn't helping your son. But Karen wasn't calming down. Her anger had crossed a line, and now she was spiraling, her voice growing shriller with every word. I will not calm down. I'm not going to let you people ruin my son's future over some old man's complaints. This is harassment. This is... Ma'am, Officer Collins interrupted, his tone more assertive now. If you don't stop, you're going to make things worse. We need you to step back. Karen whirled on him, her eyes wild. Worse? Worse? You think I'm scared of you? You think you can just push us around like this and we'll take it? I'll have your badge. I'll sue this entire department. You don't know who you're dealing with, Earl sighed, shaking his head. It was all too familiar. The refusal to take responsibility. The entitlement. The belief that the rules didn't apply to people like her. He had seen it before, in different faces, at different times. And it always led to the same outcome. Officer Collins gave Karen one final warning. Ma'am, this is your last chance. Step back, or we'll have to detain you. But Karen, too caught up in her fury to hear reason, stepped forward, pointing a finger at Collins's chest. Don't you dare threaten me. I'll have your job for this. I'm not going anywhere until you let my son go, and if you don't... Collins didn't let her finish. Cuff her. Two officers moved forward swiftly, taking Karen by the arms as she let out a shriek of outrage. You can't do this. I'll sue you all. Get your hands off of me. Jason, watching the scene unfold from the corner, looked horrified. Mom, stop. Please, just stop. But Karen wasn't listening. She was thrashing against the officers as they placed her in handcuffs, her voice ringing through the station as they led her toward the holding area. This isn't over. Do you hear me? This isn't over. As Karen's voice faded into the distance, Jason sat back in his chair, his face pale and shaken. He looked up at Earl, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. I didn't mean for this to happen, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Earl, still standing by the door, looked at Jason for a long moment. There was no more anger in his eyes, no more defiance, just the look of a boy who had seen the consequences of his actions crash down around him, and for the first time understood them. Earl's voice was soft, but steady. It's not about what you meant, son. It's about what you did. Jason nodded slowly, his eyes lowering to the floor again, the weight of it all sinking in. Officer Collins approached Earl, his expression tired but appreciative. We'll process her. I'm sorry it had to come to this. Earl nodded, his heart heavy. Some people don't want to see the truth, officer. You did what you had to. Collins sighed, glancing toward where Karen had been taken. It's a hard thing to watch. Well, maybe this'll be a wake-up call for him. Earl looked back at the boy, whose shoulders were slumped, his eyes downcast. I hope so. Without another word, Earl turned and made his way out of the station, his mind heavy with everything that had unfolded. He had done what was right. He had stood firm. But even as he stepped into the bright light of the morning outside, he knew this wasn't the end for Jason or his mother. But it was, at least, a start. It was another quiet morning in the park, the kind Earl had always appreciated. The sun hung low in the sky, casting soft golden light across the grass, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a peaceful backdrop. Earl sat on his usual bench, his cane resting beside him, and watched as the world moved slowly around him. The events of the previous week still lingered in his mind, but there had been enough distance now for some of the tension to ease. Karen's outburst, Jason's fear, the charges, it had all played out like a whirlwind. But now, in the calm of the park, Earl was content to let those memories settle into the past. As he watched a group of children playing near the fountain, Earl noticed a figure approaching from the path. It was a slow, deliberate walk, hesitant, as if unsure of what might come next. Earl squinted slightly, and as the figure came closer, he recognized Jason. The boy looked different now. Gone was the arrogance that had fueled him during their last encounter. He seemed smaller, humbled, his steps slower and more measured. He stopped a few feet from Earl, standing awkwardly with his hands stuffed in his pockets. Mr. Johnson? Jason said quietly, his voice far softer than it had been the last time they met. Earl nodded, his expression calm but watchful. Jason. There was a long pause, the space between them heavy with unspoken words. Jason shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes downcast. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke again. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. The words came out haltingly, but there was sincerity behind them. Jason looked up at Earl, his eyes searching for some kind of response. For everything. For what I said. For what I did. It was wrong. Earl didn't speak immediately, letting the boy's words settle in the air. He could see that Jason wasn't just saying it because he had to. There was real remorse there, the kind that only comes after facing the consequences of your actions. I appreciate that, Earl said finally, his voice steady. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong. Jason nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the ground again. I didn't really get it before, you know. I didn't realize how messed up it all was. What I said, what I did. He paused, his voice quiet. But I get it now. I really do. Earl watched him carefully, seeing the shift in the boy's demeanor. This wasn't the same kid who had taunted him, who had thrown pebbles and shoved him without a second thought. This was someone who had been forced to confront himself in ways he never had before. So, what happens now? Earl asked gently, leaning on his cane. Jason sighed, pulling his hands out of his pockets and crossing his arms. Well, I got sentenced. They gave me community service, 200 hours. I'll be doing cleanup work around the city and I have to attend counseling sessions. They said it's supposed to help me deal with my anger. Earl nodded slowly. That sounds fair. Jason's face softened a little, relief flashing across his features. Yeah, it is. It's better than I thought it'd be, honestly. I got lucky, I guess. There was another pause, and then Jason looked back at Earl, his expression growing serious. I wanted to tell you about my mom, too. Earl's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained silent, letting Jason continue. She's still pretty mad. She's fighting the charges they put on her for resisting the cops. She thinks she can get out of it, but I don't know, man. Jason shook his head, a shadow of frustration crossing his face. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She's still blaming you and the police, and everyone but herself. Earl exhaled deeply, not surprised by the news, but disappointed all the same. That sounds about right, he said quietly. Some people don't want to face the truth. Jason nodded, his face falling. Yeah, I tried talking to her about it, you know. Tried to explain how things really went down, and how she needs to let it go, but she won't listen to me. She never does. There was a long, heavy silence between them. Earl could see the weight Jason was carrying, the frustration, the helplessness of seeing someone close to you refuse to change. He had seen it before in others, and it pained him to see the boy struggling with it now. But, Jason added after a moment, his voice soft but determined, I'm not going to be like her. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day, and I don't want to live my life blaming everyone else for my problems. That's not who I want to be. Earl nodded slowly, his heart softening at the boy's words. That's a good start, son. The fact that you see that you want to be better, That's more than a lot of folks ever figure out. Jason smiled faintly, his eyes filled with gratitude. I owe you for that, mister. I really do. If you hadn't pressed charges, if you just let me get away with it, I wouldn't have learned anything. I probably would have just kept doing the same stupid stuff. He paused, then added quietly, thank you. Earl looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You don't owe me anything, Jason. What you do next, that's on you, but I hope you stay on this path. It's a better one than the one you were on before. Jason's smile grew a little wider, though it still carried a touch of sadness. Yeah, I will. I'm trying. With that, Jason shifted his weight again, clearly unsure if he should say more or if he'd already said too much. Earl could sense the boy's discomfort and decided to ease it. You'll be all right, Earl said softly, his tone reassuring. It ain't gonna be easy, but if you keep at it, you'll be all right. Jason nodded, relief washing over him. Thanks, Mr. Johnson. He turned to leave, walking away slowly, his posture lighter than it had been when he first arrived. Earl watched him go, a strange sense of hope blooming in his chest. The road ahead for Jason would be long, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time, Earl believed the boy had a real chance at changing. And as the boy disappeared down the path, Earl leaned back on the bench, letting the warmth of the morning sun settle over him. The park felt peaceful again, but this time, it wasn't just the quiet surroundings. It was the knowledge that sometimes people can change, even when it seems impossible.